All right. We got to check and see if the live is live. Let us look. Let's see here. Perfect. All right. All right. Well, good evening. I'm Ryan Tower. This is Living in the Logos. I appreciate you for being here. I hope that you're having a good weekend. It is, what is it? It's Saturday, February 7th, and we have a lot to talk about. I'm sure you've probably heard of, let's see. Sorry, I just got to make sure this microphone is working. All right, we're good. Sorry about that. So I'm sure you've heard of the Epstein files. I'm sure you've been following along at least a little bit what's been going on, what people were talking about. There's a lot of interesting things for us to cover tonight, but I wanted to start off by saying just a couple things in lieu of what we're going to be talking about. So I guess kind of as a disclaimer, I'm not the kind of person that you should be looking to for financial advice. I'm not a financial professional. I don't have any legitimate training or qualifications when it comes to investing or finance in any way. I'm just simply a guy with the internet, and I've been, I wouldn't say obsessively, but above average interest in the function of money and how it works in the world, what its, what its meaning is for us. And that kind of question, I think, is often missed in these types of analysis. And so what I wanted to do is try and take some of the things that I've thought about Bitcoin, about money, and put them all into one video and sort of give you guys my thesis on why I'm a big supporter of Bitcoin, why I think it's a really important technology. And in fact, a lot of what happens in the future, in my opinion, is actually hinging on Bitcoin. And that's the reason why you're seeing these very wealthy operators in the world of finance trying to subvert it. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about that. And we're also going to be talking about the the implications of the Epstein files. I'm not, there's tons of people online that are going through the files, in detail and specifically, and I'm not going to be doing that. What I'd rather do, and kind of the intention of the channel and my whole philosophy when it comes to doing this type of analysis, is just to try and give you guys a context that makes sense of kind of what's happening. So obviously, when you look at the news and the way that information is delivered to people nowadays, it can be a little bit overwhelming. There can be a lot of analysis paralysis, is what I like to think of it as, where you're just inundated with so much information that it becomes difficult to find any certainty or really just make sense of anything in general. So I hope that, or the goal of this episode is to try and give you some context to make sense of what is all happening, because especially with a subject like the Epstein files, I mean, this is a long time coming, and there's been a lot said about it. And of course, the nature of the subject, Epstein being this kind of clandestine financial influencer and sex predator, there's obviously a lot of sensational news. There's a lot of emotional baggage that comes along with that. And it's good to have a good context, and it's important to have a good context just so that you don't get caught up in the sensation and the emotion, and that you're drawing conclusions that reflect the way things actually are. And with Epstein specifically, it's very fascinating what it's revealed. And a lot of it is very expected, but we're going to get into it more in detail as we go on. But as a way of introduction, I just wanted to make sure everybody knows that I'm not a financial professional. In no way am I recommending that you do anything specifically with your money, apart from educate yourself, understand the decisions that you're making. And when it comes to something like Bitcoin and investing, the only way to learn is to really put yourself through the learning curve, and time, awareness, and information, and integrating what you've learned is the only way to really build conviction. And so when, when people see that Bitcoin can lose 50% of its value in a relatively short period of time, that's a difficult thing to psychologically process. And so it's important to look towards, people that have been through it before, that understand the process a little bit better and have the experience. And that's what I do. And so, the information that I bring to you guys concerning Bitcoin is really the product of other people's labor. I'm not involved in any way in cryptography. I do not, I know enough about computer code. I'm not a professional coder in any way. But I think that I can offer you guys at least a little bit from my own experience, in whatever way that's limited. I still think it'll be useful to you. And like I said, we'll develop some context. So strap in, because this is going to be pretty interesting. So I think what I wanted to start off addressing was some of the sorry, I want to make sure I have my my screen ready, because I do have a few photos, things that I'd like to look at, a la Bitcoin and Epstein. So you're probably going to hear, on the internet, if you look on Twitter or anything like that, you're going to see a bunch of people that are talking about Bitcoin as though it's been subverted, as though it's been co-opted, as though the revelation in the Epstein files that he was involved in investing in Coinbase, that he had given $500,000 to a place called MIT Media Labs at the time, which was actually financing some of the core developers on Bitcoin. And these revelations have triggered a whole cascade of ridiculous and sensational news, where very quickly online, this little snippet of information about Epstein being involved in investing some of the original companies surrounding Bitcoin, the conclusion that the sensational aspect of the internet drew was that Epstein created Bitcoin, or that he was secretly Satoshi Nakamoto, or even just that his money had such an influence at the time that he was giving it, that he somehow created a backdoor in Bitcoin, or left a pathway for somebody to manipulate it in the future. And none of that is true, of course, but it makes for really good headlines. And what I wanted to explain to you guys is, there's a really good way of trying to suss out whether or not information is meant to just give you knowledge, or if it's meant to manipulate you emotionally. And when it comes to investing, especially with things like Bitcoin, you have to be extremely cognizant of the fact that there are really, really intelligent, wealthy people who have a lot of influence and time on their hands, that don't want you to hold and keep your Bitcoin. And these are the kind of people that have the media at their disposal. They can influence the timeline, they can influence social media. Now, I'm not saying that every person online is secretly working, to manipulate you, but the reality is that these stories begin somewhere, and they gain notoriety, and they get attention on the algorithm for a reason. And so if somebody is saying, for instance, that Epstein is Satoshi Nakamoto, I actually paid for this article on Bloomberg because I thought it was interesting. Anyways, let's see if I can get the screen share to work. And what we're going to look at is, oh, nice, this does work. Okay, so we're going to look at, this is an article on Bloomberg. It is called Epstein's Library. The disgraced financier purchased books about making money, treating narcissism, negotiating with anyone, achieving ecstasy, and understanding life. Now, I've gone through this a couple times, and I will say that Jeffrey Epstein was a reader. I mean, if he read even a portion of all these books that he was buying, he was certainly learning a lot. But as far as Bitcoin goes, this is the most important part. And so in 2018, let's see, I believe 2017, 2018, here it is. So in 2018, which was more than a decade after Bitcoin was created, at the same time that he was trying to learn about, I guess, the history of the Medicis and money in general, he purchased Bitcoin for Dummies. He purchased a guide for understanding Ethereum, and also Blockchain Technology Explained. So when people say, "Oh, Bitcoin was secretly created by Jeffrey Epstein," it's pretty clear, even in the emails where Bitcoin is mentioned, that Jeffrey Epstein was in no way, shape, or form involved in the creation of Bitcoin. And maybe this is a good opportunity for me to share just kind of what I think about the situation. So you'll hear online, and many people are aware of the fact that SHA-256, or some of the cryptography that's used in the coding that makes Bitcoin, was created by people involved with the NSA or intelligence in some fashion in the US. Um, and this distinction that I'm about to make is very important. Because NSA created this aspect that is used by the white paper in Bitcoin that is actually ends up becoming part of the code itself that runs on all of the computers in the distributed network that makes up the Bitcoin network, that code is open source and verifiable. And so there's no opportunity for a backdoor or some type of secret code to exist. And the code as it was when it was released at the time, if that code is changed, it requires a whole democratic process that involves uniting a portion of the computing power on the network to decide to run that new code. And so when people criticize Bitcoin and they say that it's been subverted or they say that it's compromised, it's almost 100% of the time reflecting a lack of understanding of how anti-fragile the network that makes Bitcoin is. The aspect of Bitcoin that most people think about is the investing, the trading, the manipulating volatility in order to make money. But the reality is that the whole infrastructure is important, and there's many moving parts that make it what it is. And so just remember that when you're hearing these criticisms of Bitcoin, and the majority of the time, the reality is that people don't necessarily understand how the code works and how the network operates in general. And that can lead to some pretty obvious misunderstandings. And that can lead you to believing people that don't also understand how the decentralized network works. And they will convince you to do things that are stupid, like sell your Bitcoin to people like BlackRock and Larry Fink and people like JP Morgan, who are trying to get your Bitcoin because they understand the implications of the scarcity of Bitcoin and what that means for the future. And so when you see the price going down and everybody's freaking out and everybody's saying that they're going to sell everything, that Epstein created Bitcoin, that Wall Street has subverted and compromised it, you have to remember that those news stories, well, there could be an element of truth to them. I'm not saying just don't believe anything you hear, but I am saying that there are wealthy people with an incentive to trick you. And they want to trick you into getting rid of your Bitcoin because they want to own most of the supply. It's very simple. And basically, let's take a minute to explain I'm going to give you like the short and dirty version of kind of what's happened so far after Bitcoin was created. Through when we know this through the Epstein emails, it was very clearly an attempt to subvert it right from the beginning. And Epstein in the emails is trying to figure out kind of a who's who of the Bitcoin core developers. He kind of, finagles himself into giving some money to the MIT Media Labs. He obviously invests in all of these companies as they're starting up as well. And so I think from a money standpoint, he was well connected and networked enough to be able to see an opportunity and to understand the value proposition of Bitcoin. But, his operation and the implications of what he's doing necessitates that he makes an attempt to participate in some way. I mean, basically, his job is to know about these kind of things, get into them early, and make the people that he represents a bunch of money, including himself. And so it's obvious that he was involved, but only in the sense that he was seeing it as a way to either make money for him and his investors, and also to network into the cryptocurrency kind of environment and ecosystem and do what he does in Wall Street and the central banking system in the cryptocurrency industry. Um, But what ends up happening is it doesn't work, and you can tell by the emails that Epstein fails in trying to compromise the people at Bitcoin. Although he does kind of influence a few of the core developers, we know that the code has maintained its sanctity because we can verify it and it's open source. And so I think once the protocol is open sourced and you start, the ecosystem is already decentralized and is building and becoming stronger, the realization on behalf of the people like Jeffrey Epstein and likely the people that he works for, their realization was that if we can't influence the code, if we can't actually change what it is, and we can't easily or quickly subvert it through computing power by compromising the people who are running nodes. I mean, these are all just regular people running the Bitcoin nodes. They're not like Wall Street. Some of them are, but the majority of them aren't. And so the realization was that they can either create alternatives that can compete with Bitcoin, or they can try and own most of the supply of Bitcoin. And those are really the only two ways that the establishment has to impact and subvert Bitcoin. And they haven't been successful yet, although in the present time, you now have people like Coinbase and these businesses that will custody your Bitcoin on your behalf. And this is a very subtle way of centralizing Bitcoin supply in the hands of these companies that are custodying it for other people. And that allows kind of derivative Bitcoin, or paper Bitcoin as it's called, to become a thing. And once that becomes a thing, you can manipulate the short-term price of Bitcoin, which we see in these huge volatile drops where we have massive sell-offs. You can manipulate the short-term price of Bitcoin by using these derivative Bitcoins while you custody everybody else's. But the long-term price, which is determined by people actually holding it and not selling it, and the majority of people will be holding it in self-custody, which means they actually own the keys to their Bitcoin. It's not being held by Coinbase and then used to create derivatives. That's what determines the long-term price. And the people at Coinbase, the people like Michael Saylor, the Wall Street operatives, the people that have wealth and time and incentive, they understand this. And so they're trying to convince people, sure, you can buy Bitcoin, but just let us hold on to it for you because it's so much easier. I mean, you don't have to worry about the keys and you could lose them. And so it's really just, it's a subtle way of centralizing an enormous amount of Bitcoin. And they've been successful so far. They've been able to centralize a lot of it. And so when you look at the impact of volume on this recent sell-off, and if you look, I don't have the charts pulled up, but if my point is just to tell you that the volume in this massive sell-off did not reflect a whole bunch of actual Bitcoin, and that's obvious in the volume signatures. And so the majority of that selling was happening on, in my opinion, and this is, a speculation, but it seems to me that the majority of that selling was happening in derivative Bitcoin and not actually self-custodied Bitcoin that people were selling into the spot market. And so why is that important? Well, it's important because when you look at this at the long term, the adoption of Bitcoin is going to continue. The value proposition has already been accepted by the most important people in the world. And by that, I mean the people who control the flow of transnational capital, both here in the US and in countries around the world. Those people know that Bitcoin is a thing. They're already fully invested. They've spent time and money trying to subvert it and compromise it. And they've decided that their best bet is literally to just get as much of the supply as possible. And that necessitates these very volatile and controlled demolitions of the price so that a new low can be formed and the people who have money and time can start to accumulate at those lower prices. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because you, in my opinion, and the way that I like to think about it, is that the more decentralized Bitcoin we get, us, the regular people, the plebs, whatever you want to call us, if we can get more self-custodied Bitcoin off of the market and store it away, we're assuring that the network remains more pure and that it remains decentralized and that it actually does what Bitcoin was meant to do. The idea that Bitcoin was designed to create derivatives and that it was meant to have companies and corporations hold all these keys for other people just so that it was easier. I mean, none of this was really the idea. The idea was that every individual can own the keys to their Bitcoin. They can take it with them anywhere in the world very easily. They can send it to anyone very easily. And it's a sovereign way of taking your own wealth and making it yours, and also boycotting the financial industrial complex that comes around the dollar system. And for many other reasons, apart from that, Bitcoin is obviously a target for people who are wealthy, like Jeffrey Epstein, and people who operate at the source of debt creation in the West, because Bitcoin is very implicitly a response to the ridiculous nature of fiat money. And, everybody knows about how, well, they know that inflation works. They might not know how it works, but we all know that dollars are constantly being inflated away, and the whole economy in America right now is predicated on the creation of more dollars, which are then in various ways circulated back into the stock market to pump up the prices of the most the most valuable stocks. And so there's like this vicious circle of debt creation and then shoveling that money into the system of the stock market, where it then ends up concentrating into the hands of people who use the profits to purchase hard assets like gold, Bitcoin, land, etc. And so this is the system. That's how it works. And Epstein was at a nexus point in that system, which was where individuals who have influence and capital have an eddy basically to throw their money into the river that's creating more money for everybody else. And so you have to understand that Bitcoin is an antithesis to that whole system. The fact that an individual can take custody of their own Bitcoin, and it can be 10 cents or it can be $10 billion, and the impact is exactly the same. And the ease is exactly the same. And for many other reasons, obviously, it's a threat to the system, but most explicitly, it really removes this ability to create debt, use the money that creates the debt to buy assets, and then leave the country where the money is created holding the bag of that debt, which is basically what the entire system has been. So, all that to say, I hope that you'll consider Bitcoin more. Try not to fall prey to these psychological operations to try and convince you to sell your Bitcoin or to not buy Bitcoin. I'm of the opinion that just the use case alone of the fact that cash and gold are very good ways of having sovereign money, but they obviously have their limitations in terms of the internet. In terms of gold, it's very difficult to transport, and when you have a lot of it, it's a big issue as far as security is concerned. So the reason for Bitcoin is very obvious, and people know this. It's like I said, it's been accepted by the right people. But what's interesting about it is because it's so unique and because it was created in a decentralized way, the elite and the managerial class who are trying to convince you to sell them your Bitcoin, they know that this is a haven to survive what's coming in the dollar. It's very obvious that they know that, and we can know that too. And that's what's unique about it, because the elite are using the same vehicle in order to hedge themselves against what's going to happen to the dollar. And we know about it ahead of time. We can also ride that same wave with the elite who are in the know. And what's even more unique is that Bitcoin, in my opinion, was not created by people like Jeffrey Epstein. I think it was created by truly cypherpunk computer programmers. And I think that the intention was not for it to be open sourced. And I think because it was open sourced, it triggered a cascade of events and changes in the world that we're just now seeing the real fruits of. So I hope that people um, will investigate it further. I mean, don't take my word for it. The whole ethos of the community is don't trust but verify. So look into what I've said and, do your own research. And, I hope that was helpful. And I hope that you really consider it, because it is my opinion that it's a unique opportunity, and the elite class of the future will likely be made of people who hold Bitcoin. And if you don't do it, don't do it as a get rich quick scheme. Do not think about it as, a way to leverage a whole bunch of money and 100x your investment, but consider it for the future, for your posterity. I don't want to be sensational, and I don't like to do, very specific predictions, but it's possible that Bitcoin will be worth $1, $2, $3 million a coin at some point in the future. And if it's not in this generation, it could very likely be in the time of your children's lives. And so consider it. Think about what I've said. Think about it on your own. There's plenty of really good resources out there. If you're interested in really diving into the geopolitical aspect, or learning a little bit more about the history and the technology itself, you can check out Simon Dixon. He's an OG Bitcoin investor. He wrote the first book that was ever published about Bitcoin. He's been involved since it was $3. He's such an incredible guy, and he's literally spent his life trying to educate people about Bitcoin. And he's been a big impact on how I think about it, especially in more recent times. So yeah, I hope you guys will check it out. I'm gonna take a quick break, and then I'm gonna come back, and we'll do a little bit more about Epstein. So I appreciate you guys being here. I hope that was helpful, and God bless, and I'll talk to you soon.